The gray morning light seeped through the narrow prison windows, casting pale lines across the concrete floor. Officer Daniel Reed walked the corridor with steady steps, the sound of his boots echoing through the silence. Today was Clara Morales's final day. He had guarded many inmates before, but something about her calm presence unsettled him. Inside her cell, Clara sat quietly on the edge of her bed, a small worn-out book in her hands. When Daniel opened the door, she lifted her eyes and smiled faintly, a gesture far too gentle for someone hours away from death. "You don't look afraid," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone detached. "I was," she replied softly. "But fear is useless now." There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. Her calmness made Daniel uneasy. He checked her restraints, reviewed the schedule, yet his mind kept drifting. She didn't curse, didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him as if she saw something more, a man trapped in his own sense of duty. As the hours passed, the weight in the air grew heavier. The warden's orders came. "Prepare the prisoner." Daniel escorted Clara down the hallway, each step echoing with the quiet rhythm of inevitability. She stopped for a moment, her eyes fixed on the small barred window at the end of the corridor where sunlight filtered through. "It's strange," she murmured. "Even the light feels different when you know it's the last time." Daniel said nothing. He had no words that would sound right. When they reached the final room, Clara turned to him and whispered, "Officer Reed, I have one favor to ask." He looked at her, uncertain whether to listen or refuse. She met his eyes with calm desperation. "Please," she said, "let me give you something before it's over." For the first time that morning, Daniel's hand trembled. Daniel stood by the door, unsure if he should answer. The prison clock ticked loudly, marking each second that slipped away. Clara reached slowly into the pocket of her prison uniform and pulled out a small folded paper, creased and worn. "It's a letter," she said quietly. "For my daughter." Daniel froze. Rules were clear. No contact, no personal exchanges. He had built his entire career on following orders. Yet the way Clara held that paper, with trembling fingers and eyes full of pleading, made it impossible to look away. "She's only 6, Clara continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Her name is Lila. She still believes I'm somewhere far away, working. I just want her to know I love her. That I'm sorry." Her words cracked something inside him. Daniel had 2 daughters of his own. He pictured their small hands, their laughter. For a moment, the walls, the bars, the uniforms, all of it faded. What remained was one mother, one man, and the weight of a single decision. "I can't," he muttered, his throat tight. "It's against regulation." Clara nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand. I just thought, maybe you'd know what it means to be a parent." Her voice broke. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Daniel turned away, but the image of her, calm, broken and still kind, followed him long after he left the cell. That night, sitting alone in his small apartment, Daniel took off his badge and placed it on the table. The letter's image haunted him. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was waiting for an answer she would never get. And Daniel Reed knew sleep wouldn't come easy again. The following morning felt colder than usual. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the guardroom, a soft rhythm that mirrored the weight in Daniel's chest. He had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, Clara's words replaying endlessly in his mind. "Maybe you'd know what it means to be a parent." By the time he reached the prison, the sky was still gray. The hallway to the death chamber was quiet, too quiet. Other officers avoided eye contact. They all knew what day it was. Daniel adjusted his uniform, forcing himself to look composed, but his pulse betrayed him. When he entered Clara's cell, she was already standing. Her wrists were cuffed, her head held high. There was no anger, no fear, only peace. Daniel's throat tightened. She smiled faintly when she saw him. "You came back," she said softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I did." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, full of everything they couldn't say. Finally, Daniel reached into his pocket. The folded letter was there, the one she had asked him to deliver. He had taken it before his shift, against every rule he'd sworn to follow. He handed it to her carefully. "I'll make sure she gets it," he said, his voice barely steady. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She didn't speak. She just nodded once, slowly, and pressed her forehead against the cold bars between them. "Thank you," she whispered. Minutes later, Daniel escorted her down the long corridor. The echo of their footsteps filled the space, each step a reminder of what was coming. As they reached the final door, Clara turned to him with a quiet smile. "You did the right thing," she said. "Don't ever doubt that." When the door closed behind her, Daniel stood frozen, the sound of the rain fading into silence. Somewhere deep inside, something in him shifted, a part of his soul breaking free from the chains of rules he had always obeyed. For the first time in his career, Daniel Reed had chosen humanity over the law. Weeks passed, but Daniel couldn't escape the memory of that day. The sound of Clara's calm voice, the look in her eyes before the door closed, it all stayed with him. Every night he replayed it, wondering if the letter ever should have left his hands. But the promise weighed heavier than the fear of punishment. One cloudy afternoon he finally decided. He found the address written at the bottom of the letter. Maria Morales, Clara's sister. The paper was fragile, ink slightly smudged from Clara's trembling hands. Daniel took a deep breath and drove to a small, worn neighborhood at the edge of town. The house was modest, paint peeling, a single swing creaking in the wind. A little girl sat there, clutching a stuffed bear. Her dark curls framed a face so innocent it made his chest tighten. She looked up when he approached. "Are you Lila?" he asked softly. The girl nodded, wary but curious. A woman appeared at the door, Maria. Her tired eyes widened when she saw Daniel's uniform. "Officer, is this about Clara?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel hesitated, then reached into his jacket and handed her the letter. "She wanted her daughter to have this," he said quietly. Maria took it with shaking hands. Lila stepped closer, eyes wide. "Is it from my mom?" she asked. Daniel nodded. He couldn't speak. As Maria read the letter aloud, Clara's words of love, regret, and hope, the little girl began to cry softly, clutching her bear tighter. The air felt heavy with something sacred. When the reading ended, Lila looked up at Daniel and whispered, "Thank you for bringing her back." Those words pierced him deeper than any reprimand ever could. As he turned to leave, Maria called out, "She'd be grateful, you know, Clara, for what you did." Daniel paused at the gate, glancing back one last time. Lila was waving at him, smiling through her tears. And for the first time in years, Daniel smiled back. That night, he didn't dream of prisons or corridors. He dreamt of sunlight, of a child's laughter, and a letter that had found its way home. Years slipped quietly into the past, but Daniel Reed never forgot that day. He left the prison service not long after, trading steel bars and cold corridors for a quieter life. Sometimes he still caught himself looking toward the horizon at sunset, remembering Clara's final words. "You did the right thing." Time, however, has a way of mending wounds. One spring morning, Daniel received an envelope in the mail. The handwriting was neat but familiar, careful, deliberate. Inside was a photo, a young woman in a police cadet's uniform, smiling proudly. On the back, a simple message was written. "Dear Officer Reed, you don't know what your kindness meant to me. My mother's letter gave me strength when I had none. Because of her, and because of you, I chose to protect others. Lila Morales." Daniel stared at the photo for a long time. The child he'd once seen on a broken swing was now grown, wearing the same badge he had once carried. But unlike him, she carried it with a heart unburdened by guilt. That evening, he visited Clara's grave for the first time. The air was still, the grass wet with rain. He placed the photo gently on the stone and whispered, "She made it, Clara. She's everything you hoped she'd be. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, and for a fleeting second, Daniel felt a strange peace, a sense that Clara's spirit lingered, watching over her daughter. He smiled softly, tears in his eyes, and turned toward the fading light. As he walked away, he realized something profound. Sometimes redemption doesn't come through forgiveness or confession, but through the quiet act of keeping a promise. And that promise had changed 2 lives forever. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories like this one. Stay tuned. More heart-touching tales are coming soon. Like, share, and subscribe to support the channel.